Back in 2014, a company called Vanmoof shocked the entire world by building some of the coolest bikes ever made. But it took less than 8 years to shock the world again, and the result is not pretty. So that's why I made it my mission to prove that these bikes can be repaired without any help or even parts from Vanmoof. Because throwing all of those bikes away, well, that's a bit too easy, and also I think that's quite sad. So today we are starting a brand new project. Meet Zara. Ta-da! So this is Zara, my brand new second-hand Vanmoof X2. I picked it up in Amsterdam and paid 150 bucks. The computer is completely dead and nothing works anymore, which makes it quite the perfect bike to try and repair with universal cheap parts. So the really annoying part right now is that the kick lock got pressed, but the bike doesn't unlock anymore because the controller is broken. So what I'm gonna do is try and remove the rear wheel in order to get access to the kick lock, and then remove the kick lock, and then we can sort of start cleaning the bike and the chain and everything before disassembly, because I do like to work on a clean bike. So that's the game plan for now. Oh my god, this bike really is brand spanking new. That means that this bike has never driven a single kilometer in its entire life. Just broke. It's always a bit sketchy when the seller tells you like, oh, it's brand new, the bike hasn't driven a single mile or kilometer. But you just don't know until you actually get it. But credits to the seller, because this really is a brand new bike. So to make cleaning a bit easier, I made sure to take the chain off of the bike, even though there wasn't that much to clean. And you don't need any tools for this, since you can just bend this chain link a bit and the front face will just fall off. Then I could go ahead and try to take out that rear wheel with the kick lock engaged, which went better than I expected. We can actually... Yes! Nice! Now that we got access to the kick lock, it's fairly easy to remove with just a couple of safety Torx bolts. And after removing those two bolts, you can use two little pins, or Allen keys in my case, to remove the actual sliding pin. And that's one kick lock removed. Not too bad, right? So the bike now moves freely, which is quite a big improvement, if I may say so myself. So that's nice. So in the first episode we already improved the bike, which is, I think that's very cool. So now it's time to give it a wash outside, and you won't hear me talking a lot because it's very windy. All right. Yep. So I'm just spraying the bike down with some degreaser and scrubbing it with an old kitchen brush. And even though it is raining outside, I don't find this task annoying, since the result is always very rewarding. Something that I do think is annoying is removing all of that old foam tape. And that's why I just quickly got it out of the way and over with. Now, I did mention that this bike is brand new, but the previous owner probably didn't take very good care of it, since some of the parts are crazy scratched up. And my guess is that they were just done with this bike at some point and probably didn't care anymore, which is why it is in this state. To remove the front wheel, you also need to unplug the motor, of course. But to get to it, there's a couple of little screws and a plastic guard, but after removing those, you can easily remove the front wheel from the bike. Alright, so in order to basically convert a broken Vanmoof into a working Vanmoof with not a lot of money, by the way, what you'll want to do is strip the bike of all of its components that try to communicate with each other. So the whole bike, every part tries to communicate with the other part in a Vanmoof language, and we want to make that language universal. So if we take, for instance, the battery, this has a custom-made Vanmoof BMS inside of it, and basically the BMS doesn't transmit any power from the battery unless the Vanmoof computer tells the BMS like, it's okay, you can now transmit power. So that's why we will replace that circuit board with a like very cheap €5 and universal one that doesn't need that communication. Now I will get into replacing all of the individual parts a bit more once we get to them, but for now that's sort of the plan, to remove all of the communication parts and then replace the controller with a universal controller. So now you might be wondering, why am I stripping the complete bike apart if I only need to replace a couple of parts? Well, that's because in my mind, and try and follow along here, in my mind, someone with a lot of money can just go to a store and buy a new working Vanmoof, and yeah, they'll be just as cool as us, who rebuilt their entire bike. So what I figured is that if I tear this complete bike apart, give it a custom paint job, it will look very cool and unique and be somewhat different than the person who just bought it at the store, which will be fun. So for now, that's a lot of talking. Let's get back to building.
The first thing to do now is take off these cranks, and to do that you need a big Allen key and also a special bicycle tool, which is called a crank puller. Now this clever bit of design screws into the crank with one part and then presses onto the spindle with the other part. And this force pushes the pressed crank off, so I think they should have named it a crank pusher, but okay, let's continue. Now both cranks have normal lefty-loosey threads, and that's unlike the pedals and the bottom bracket, which both have one side that's reversed. To take out a Vanmoof battery you need to take out a few bolts to take off a cap, and you can actually do this with the rear wheel in the bike if you just let down the tire, which I think is pretty clever. Now this can happen, pulling the threaded insert out of the battery cap, which is not ideal, but luckily there are a lot of other things to focus on in the meantime, like these 1 billion screws to take out the controller. It's a lot easier to take them out with the bike flipped upside down, and as a bonus we can now spray some WD-40 to help with removing the battery in a couple of minutes. Knowing Vanmoof, of course all of these screws are safety Torx, which is just a Torx bolt but then with a little hole in the middle. I don't mind them, and actually I really like Torx in general, but it is good to double check if you have these in your toolbox before working on a Vanmoof, since you will really need them. One of the bolts is really hard to get to, and since it's all the way up in the corner of the frame, I tried tapping out a Torx bit out of my socket, but then I found a loose one, and with a bit of work I finally got the bolt out. In the meantime, all of the WD-40 made it down to the handlebars, which gives me the best chance to remove the battery, so I'm really looking forward to that. And after removing the headlight, that's about it, and I could flip the bike back up to start on the cable harness, electronics and also the front fork.
So just quickly before removing the original wiring harness, I did think about keeping it and using it to sort of splice into the old connectors, since that does make for a very nice and tidy and pretty easy install. But the problem is that a lot of these bikes do have faulty wiring harnesses, and you maybe at home watching might have a bike that you don't know what the problem is, or you know that the wiring harness is the problem and you cannot get it anymore because Vanmoof went bankrupt and all that stuff. So I think it's better to keep everything universal, and as a small little bonus I can let my internal baboon out to sort of start tearing the bike apart, because now there's really nothing left saving in the controller and wiring part, which makes it fairly fun. So I'm looking forward to that.
Now if you made it this far into the video, I would really like it if you subscribe to the channel. It helps me out with doing these projects, and I think you will definitely like the next couple of videos on this bike. Also be sure to let me know what you think of this project in the comments, or if you can guess what song this is. I'm just removing the last couple of bits on the bike, like the rear caliper, and since the bike is brand new, I don't even need to replace the brake pad, which also saves a bit of money. Also, the mechanical brakes have proven to work really well if you just stay on top of the maintenance, and on my previous Vanmoof build I was planning on converting them to hydraulic, but actually there's really no need for it. In the meantime, I got the battery out, which took a bit of persuasion to do, and since the X-shaped frame is quite different to the normal S version, the controller consists of 2 parts instead of 1, which I think is pretty clever.
Nice.
Now the next couple of bolts were almost impossible to get to, and I had to get a little creative with getting them out. But sadly, even after those were out, the connector still wouldn't come loose. So the only option therefore was this very special high-end Vanmoof tool, which worked perfect. So finally the entire bike is stripped down, including that stubborn little cable harness, which can go straight to the bin.
So next up is paint and also dropping off the battery, because the battery I want to get it tested before I start modifying the entire BMS, just to make sure that the battery cells aren't so weak that they only do like 15 kilometers, because that would be a little bit of a waste of time if I start doing that and then only found it out afterwards. And I don't know anything about this bike, so I think that's a pretty sensible step to make. And then I'm also going to use some filler to plug some holes from the old LED matrix display. And I did make some mistakes with it previous time, so I learned some stuff. Hope it works. I'm going to try that now, let it dry, drop off the battery, and then start the painting process.
This is the sticker that covers the Vanmoof dot or matrix display. And the best way to get it off is with a lot of heat and also a lot of peeling. Now these are all things that I wouldn't have to do if I just left the bike its original color, but we are giving this bike away when it's finished, and the person that I have in mind will really appreciate a unique bike. This is body filler, and it's what a body shop uses to fill small imperfections on your car if you ever get it repainted. It also works great to close off these holes in the frame, but you need to be sure to sand it properly afterwards. While that is drying, I took my other rebuilt Vanmoof out to go and test the battery. Now, although this really isn't needed to rebuild a Vanmoof, I quite like it to just make sure that I'm not wasting my time on a bad battery. My buddy Chris, who owns a e-bike battery center called Renewak, first exposed the internal battery cells. Then he charged those cells to their maximum capacity before hooking it up to the test machine. Now this machine discharges the complete battery pack and measures the total capacity that comes out of it. Mine delivered 486 watt hours, which means that compared to its original 508, it still has 95 and a bit percentage left over. After testing, the battery is drained to 30 volts, so he makes sure to recharge it before assembling the battery. Thanks, Chris. After picking up the battery, the filler had dried completely, which means that now it's time for sanding. Last time I just used some sandpaper, but because this is flexible, my fingers indented the holes, which is why I'm using a file to begin with. In an ideal world, you would sand the bike back to bare metal, but scuffing up every part is the least you should do. In my experience, I have noticed that painting over factory paint works fine, but if something has been repainted before, it's probably best to strip it completely. But of course, this is just my experience and I'm definitely not a professional painter. In between sanding, I'm wiping it down, which really shows all of the glossy parts which I didn't reach yet. So those will need some extra sanding. I'm also masking off the frame number and bottom bracket, because I could not find the tool to remove it, and this is fine as well. To further sand down the body filler, I got a bit of wood and I cut it down to 2 small pieces. Those pieces then got some sandpaper glued to them, and after drying they were perfect for smoothing the surface on the top tube without indenting the holes. Another little trick that I'm using this time around is using filler primer instead of normal primer. This basically evens out a thicker coat of primer to help smooth out any imperfections that I might have missed with prepping. Now, prep work really is key with these sort of things, so even though it's a lot of work, time and effort, I really want to get it perfect, so I'm going over everything multiple times to make sure that I didn't miss anything. Something that I almost forgot is the little basket that goes on the front of the bike. I also wanted color match to the frame, so that's why I also prepped it for paint. So at this point all of the holes in the frame are filled with dust from all of the sanding, of course. So I'm giving it a wash with some water and some degreaser before paint, because otherwise the aerosol can will flick out all of the dust, cover the entire paint job with sanding dust, and it will be ruined. And we don't want that, so I'm quickly giving it a little rinse, and then we can get on with masking and proper degreasing. So if you've seen the previous Vanmoof build, you might be wondering what is so different about this one. Well, first of all, the X2 really is a weird and different bike, but also the previous build missed some key information, and it also had some mistakes, or well, let's call them points of improvement. So this time around I'm using everything that I have learned and I'm improving the design. So that way, if any of you are watching this at home, you can build it yourself and just skip my mistakes. So for now I'm blowing out any of the water pockets and I'm letting it dry overnight, and after that I just had to wait for a very warm and dry day to paint. So in the meantime, let me show you one of my newly arrived tools, because this is a riv nut press, and it's used to get rid of those ugly zip ties that are on my first Vanmoof build. So a riv nut basically is sort of a nut that you can expand into a bit of thin metal that you can then screw a bolt into, as I will demonstrate. So this right here is a bit of metal, and usually you'll put a bolt through the hole, and then on the other side you'll put a nut on it and tighten it that way, right? But these little things right here, you can put them through the hole and then sort of sandwich them in. So I did that in the frame for attaching the controller box already. And by the way, don't worry if you don't have this tool at home, because I still have the STL version for the zip tie one online. So you can also use that, but this is just a bit nicer. Yeah, so let's get on to paint. So let this be a reminder to be careful with knives, because somehow I forgot. Ow. Alright, after I put some band-aids around my finger and made sure to hang the bike a bit more secure, I could finish masking everything off. The little trick I like to use is tapping on a sharp edge with a metal hammer. And this seems to tear the tape on that edge, and it makes it really easy to peel off that excess. As a bonus, you don't need any knives for this method, just in case you are one of those people who doesn't know how to use them in a responsible way. Now that everything is masked off for paint, I got to suit up. And although I usually have a habit of forgetting important safety gear due to my excitement, from now on I am paying extra care to use it. I'm also using some gloves since the grease from my hands is enough to ruin this entire paint job. I like to degrease everything 3 times just to make sure that I got every single bit. Then I put the paint cans in some warm water and this makes the paint lay down a bit smoother. I don't know why exactly, but I just found that it works for me. My first coat is with the filler primer. Now I'm putting this on relatively thick to make sure that it's nice and smooth. If anything goes wrong, like a run in the paint, it's still very easy to sand it out in this stage. So after the 2 coats of primer completely dried, I got to spraying the color coat. So I'm doing this in 3 coats. 2 for an even color and decent saturation, and then a 3rd coat where I mist over everything just to get a nice even metallic finish. Any paint with a metallic flake in it is a bit more difficult to spray, but this method has worked for me for a long time now. Just for reference, I painted this bike 4 years ago and it still looks good today. Of course, I'm checking for even coverage before continuing with the final clear coat layer. Now this is a 2-part clear coat, which means that you need to activate it with a little cap at the bottom of the can. This opens a valve inside the can and makes sure that the 2 parts are able to mix with each other. After that, just shake it really well and you're good to go. So this 2-part clear is so much harder than any normal clear coat. And for something that's out of a can, it works really well. This means that we can easily cut and buff the finished results, and it's also a lot more resistant to scratches. Some parts will turn out a bit bumpy, which is referred to as orange peel. In my experience, you can eliminate this with thicker coats, but you do risk a run in the paint when it's a bit too wet. So either way, I always have to wet sand and polish. You don't have to, but it really makes it look perfect. When the bike is still wet-ish, I like to remove the masking just to avoid the paint tearing along those lines when it's dried completely. And that is one frame completely finished.
Alright, so that's all of the painting done, and to be fair, it looks really amazing, so I'm really happy with the results. It might need a little polish, but we'll get to that in a little bit later. So the next video is about rebuilding the bike, converting the entire thing, so I'm really looking forward to that as well. Please let me know what you think of the color in the comments down below. Also consider subscribing to the channel since it does help me out a lot, and it's free of course. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.